Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture and its new Storm XT52, the industry's most powerful LED point source light. Brighter than a 6K HMI and powered by Aperture's revolutionary Blair light engine, the Storm XT52 is both a tunable white light and also the brightest ever adjustable color LED. Storm XT52, unrivaled output, only from Aperture. Today, at long last, we're talking with a colorist. His credits are many and include Wonder Woman and The Lost Bus, and we've worked with him on 1917 and Empire of Light. We're pleased to welcome James Slattery. James, thank you for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an honor to be invited. Thank you.
We'd like to start with our normal question, which is, how did you get to where you are today? When you were growing up, did you think about color, or did you think this might be a path you might do, or did you want to be a painter? What was your story?
Well, I kind of fell into it, really, to be honest. When I was growing up, I'm originally from Dublin, and I always enjoyed film and photography and visual media. And I guess relatively early on, I realized that was something I wanted to pursue in a career. I didn't really know fully to what extent, but I think I reached a point maybe when I was 16 or 17 in Ireland, around about that time, when you start doing preparing for your final exams. You have to do this thing called it used to be called at least a CAO form, and you fill out what kind of college courses you would want to do. And I was trying to think what I would maybe want to pursue. And I was thinking maybe something to do with English, or maybe engineering, perhaps, or something like that. And then I remember one night just kind of lying in bed, fretting over it and thinking, well, actually, hang on a second. If I was to be really honest with myself, what am I passionate about? And what do I think? If I was really to focus myself on doing, I would, have a good chance at having a really enjoyable career and doing something that I liked and something that I could contribute to. And I decided, yep, photography, visual, that's kind of what I would like to get involved in. So from there, I picked out a course that was as practical as I could find, which was a degree course in photography and journalism. And the first year, it was a 3-year course. The first year was a bit of a mix of photography and journalism. And then from year 2, you could specialize in one or the other. So I decided to specialize in photography. And it was great. We had a lab there. There was a studio there. The photography class was quite small, and we were all very like-minded. So we all kind of clubbed together, and we'd help with shoots or crew around with different things. And that was great. That was a brilliant experience. So I kind of did that, and then finished up coming out of college with not a lot of money, and decided my next kind of step, or my next nudge along the line, was to save up to do a master's course in documentary filmmaking in the University of Ulster in Northern Ireland. So I spent a year working in a retail shop selling suits and renting out suits for weddings and things like that. And I can tell you, if you know stress, one of the most stressful things you can do is booking wedding outfits for people, because if you get that wrong, you're in trouble. You need to get that one right. So maybe that hammered in some diligence on my part. I don't know. So I did that for a while, and then saved up some money and went to do my master's course in documentary filmmaking. Documentary was an aspect of filming that I always liked. So I thought, well, again, this is just kind of nudging me on a little bit further down the line and possible career path. That was a year and a half. And again, that was a very hands-on course, small course again. We had access to various different camera equipment, mini DV cameras, and we'd all crew around for each other. And I think during the duration of the course, we each submitted maybe 3 films. And each week during the period of those submissions, we'd watch each other's rushes, and we'd comment on things and see. So it was very collaborative and very enjoyable. So finished up that course, didn't have much money. So I went back into saving up mode and worked in a camera shop off Grafton Street in Dublin. And again, that was another useful experience. I guess it was kind of still early days with digital photography. So we were getting a lot of new digital cameras in that we would have to interact with and get to know and learn to be able to advise customers and sell the cameras to people. So that was great. You get a lot of experience with DSLRs. And through my time there, I was always more into the analog side of things. So on the first floor of the shop, there was analog cameras, old Leica cameras and lenses and things. So I kind of pushed my way up to working up there. And that was my kind of domain for maybe a year or so. And again, loved that.
That's funny considering what you do now, but okay.
Yeah. Well,
Do go
a
on.
part of that as well was, I guess, which kind of maybe is a bit of a precursor to what I do. We used to have people that would come up with old photographs, maybe loved ones of theirs that had passed away, or a photograph that maybe been sitting in a windowsill for a very long time and it had had a lot of photo bleed on it. And they'd bring it into me and say, is there any way you can restore this? And that was a service we would do. I was pretty handy with Photoshop. So we would, if they had the negative, scan the negative, or if not, a lot of the time we'd just scan a print and then I would do some restoration, fairly crude restoration work, but nevertheless, it was such an enjoyable experience to see the impact that it would make to people, because they'd be these photographs that they haven't really seen very clear for a very long time. And suddenly you're presenting them with this crisp, clean picture. And it was a very meaningful kind of thing to do. So that was, again, another thing that I liked. So from there, I always had it in my mind that if I wanted to make a real go of things, I'd probably end up moving to London, which is obviously where it's a bigger film industry than what certainly was in Ireland at the time when I was living there. So I moved to London, and that was in 2010. And for the best part of a year, maybe a little less, I just took odd jobs. I would do a little bit of camera operation. I did a little bit of editing. I'd done a little bit of editing in my University of Ulster course, the documentary course, and just kind of trying out different things. And it was during that time I'd signed up with an agency, and they reached out to me one day and said, "We've got this job for you as a dailies assistant." And I was thinking, okay, I don't really know what that is, but sounds good. They said you'd be working in Pinewood Studios and you'd be on a couple of months contract at Technicolor. I thought, wow, I know that name. That sounds awesome. Sign me up. So went out there. Of course, a big part of that was it was going to be night shifts. So, okay, fine.
Of course
that
it
was the catch. Okay, fine. But I remember that first night, cycling out there, I think I had to take like cycle a bit, then took a tube, and then did another cycle, and then kind of cycling up.
Wow.
And it was this misty kind of thing, and I'm getting to the gates of Pinewood Studios, and I see the Bond stage in the distance. And wow, this is absolutely amazing. So I got through the gate and cycled around to where on the lot where Technicolor were, and they brought me in, and there was a very nice person there who trained me in some. That first night, in some of the basics of just striping tapes and preparing sound sync with this software that they had at the time called Indoor, and some basic prep for a pole gun machine, which was my first time seeing a telecine or even a grading panel. Okay. So as we're preparing for that, the assistant that was kind of training me in had laced up the film footage and had got it to the head punch, which is the kind of the start of the lab reel, and maybe ran it in a few moments. And as I'm looking at these images, I'm thinking, wow, this looks pretty good. It'd be interesting to see what happens here. And then the colorist comes in, Daily's timer, and she sat down and starts tweaking things and making some adjustments. And as I'm sitting there beside her and I'm watching, I'm thinking, that looks better. Oh, that looks better. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay. And then there's the before and after. And I thought, wow, how did I not see that? I'm a pretty visually astute person, and I have done some training. And how did I not see what is it that this person is seeing that I didn't? And that was me hooked. on color grading. 100%.
Ah,
And then from there, it was case of spending as much time and getting as much experience as I could in and around that environment. So I think I spent about 3 months on that job. And while I was there, I had heard that Deluxe was a good place to get a job. They did a lot of interesting work. So I applied for a kind of a QC role there, and I got that. Which was kind of QCing files that were being put up for the iPlayer when it was still kind of a fairly early thing. And then from there, another role came up. I think I was maybe there 3 months or 4 months or so. And a role came up in their film scanning department. So Deluxe had a contract for restoration with the Dutch national broadcaster, the Dutch Film Archive. And it was a whole range of all sorts of film material right from, I think, the 1930s up to maybe the 1980s. So print, interpause, interneg, nitrate film. Some of it was nitrate stuff that we were getting. And that was another step forward in terms of my experience, getting hands-on with film and filmmaking and the equipment that people use. With that, I was doing QCing, film handling, a lot more film handling than I'd been doing before. So lacing up telecine machines, and the colorist in that environment was doing more of a technical kind of grade. So sometimes we put the rolls of film up, and they might be very faded, or they might need a bit of more kind of general balancing in order just to get them kind of as neutral as possible for preservation. So again, that was a kind of an interesting thing, and that was my first kind of hands-on when I started sitting in front of a grading panel, was helping out. Sometimes if he maybe went to lunch, I'd maybe help do some basic balancing and run some of those reels.
Did you feel like your eye was getting better then?
Yeah.
Just by repetition of seeing this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a big part of it, I think, when you're starting out is doing that, is training your eye. As well as obviously having experience with the materials and the software and the responsibility that a lot of those roles can entertain as well. So I did that for, again, another year, and a vacancy came up in the dailies department for a dailies assistant. And they had started using the same scanning software that we had been using in the restoration department. So that was a bit of an easy transition for me to put my hand up and say, I'd love to do that. I've done a tiny bit of dailies before. I did a couple of months in Technicolor, and I'm very familiar with this scanning software. And that's how I started as a dailies assistant. I think a lot of my career has probably been kind of preparation and opportunity. So I've been very fortunate to get certain opportunities, and I've always had a mindset of try and be as prepared as possible and learn things as inside out and get as much of a variety of experience as I can, so that when I'm put in these environments and these situations, I can help out, and maybe if I'm lucky, I'll be asked to help out again. So so that's how I found myself there. And again, as a dailies assistant, you're doing little bits of helping out the dailies colorist here and there. Maybe you're helping out on some second unit stuff. Maybe you're doing some pre-balancing before they come in. At that time, I was doing a lot of, we were still getting, most dailies were still film. So a lot of it was film scanning, and we would get adverts, maybe shooting film that needed dailies turned around, so scanned and files made, or some student films as well. So that's kind of how I then started to cut my teeth a little bit on grading. And we were also starting to see a lot more features starting to shoot on digital. So I'm very lucky that I had a certain route to what I do via a very film intensive time with the film archive aspect, and then the dailies assistant role, where we were transitioning kind of between the two, which is something that I think is probably is harder to come by these days, because not as many, obviously, people shoot on film these days. So I did that for a little while. And
did you notice a big difference between doing dailies timing for something that was originated on film and originated digital?
I think in the early days, yes. I think it took a little bit of time for the technology to get up to speed, and how people also interacted with it as well. I'm trying to think of a particular example.
No, I just remember in the early days of scanning
Yeah.
and DIs that the biggest problem was always faces.
That it was
Faces would
skewed.
always come out after the scan very red, very saturated.
yeah.
It seemed
Yeah.
red magenta. So you'd always have to, in timing them, do a select on the magenta to adjust a face. But that, I mean, I don't think that's a problem now, but it was early days.
That's interesting, because early days, I suppose, there was different approaches to the way in which people would scan film. So you would maybe do a HD transfer on a telecine, and maybe it's not calibrated to the same way that a double flash ARRI scanner is going to do it when you come to do your final grade, and there will be differences inherent in the color science there. So you might see some differences.
And also, the timing dailies is so different than timing a DI, right? Because you're using different programs. So if you could explain the limitations of the OSD system for dailies versus, and does what's timed on dailies ever help in the DI?
Sure. So I spent quite a long time as a dailies colorist. I spent the best part of 10 years as a dailies colorist. And one of the things that I think was invaluable to me in that period of time is the fact that most shows will want you to time things in a very simple way in dailies, so that you're not baking in a lot of things in the dailies grade, so that when you come to do a finishing grade, you're kind of backed into a corner, and that you're also seeing the footage for what it really is, rather than masking a lot of things that could potentially cause issues later down the line. So with that, when you're grading in a dailies environment, you tend to limit yourself to simple adjustments, whether that's lift, gamma, gain, offset, and saturation. What is typically defined in what they call a CDL, or color decision list. That's essentially a file that you're able to pass further down the chain, and color will be passed through. So a lot of the jobs that I've worked on in the past in dailies were done on a platform called OSD, onset dailies. And onset dailies, you're just limited to those. For most case scenarios, you're limited to those parameters, and it means that you're doing a lot with very minimal controls, and you're having to match grade and also get a consistency in the footage, rather than slapping a whole load of different power windows and adjustments and keys on things. And it's also a lot more, I guess the word might be reverential with the footage as well. It's a much more sensible way to approach those things. Some shows, depending on what the every show is different, and some shows they will want what we would call secondary adjustments, so additional bells and whistles, keying things, maybe keying skin tones and swinging them that way, or putting windows over people's faces and bringing them up, or vignettes even, something like that. But from my experience, and certainly the way I tend to like to work is in a dailies environment, would be to keep things as simple as possible and just work with those basic controls.
Well, you said that it gets baked in, but I thought it was applied on top of the original, and then when you bring it into the DI, you could not follow it if you didn't want to.
Oh, absolutely. So it's not baked in. It's sent as a kind of a sidecar file along with the raw footage, and usually a lookup table, and when you combine all of those elements, you will get a representation of what you're seeing in your timed dailies. So the timed dailies will be a file that's generated with a baked in grade and LUT, and that is baked in. But when you get to the DI, you're going back to the camera raw, and you're applying that CDL, and you're reapplying that LUT, and the idea is that what you see in dailies is the exact same as what you see in the DI as a starting point. And that can be extremely useful, because it gives you a sense of what the intention was on the day with the footage, and it's just a rock solid starting point of where to work from. But it's also it then also means that it's quite crucial that in the dailies that you achieve as close to the look that you're looking for as possible.
And also because another reason is nowadays, with there being more and more visual effects, oftentimes they're starting on visual effects before the DI. So their reference is going to be the dailies timing, right?
Absolutely. So they need to have a target for what to shoot for and what the scene is supposed to look like. It's not much use to them if the dailies that has been generated that they're looking at is going to be a massive deviation from what you end up with in the final grade when you get into the DI suite, you know.
Can you talk about how you relate to the on-set DIT, the digital imaging technician? How does what the DIT is doing with the cinematographer on set relate to what
and
you
also,
do on the dailies?
because sometimes they're doing light timing, so you get a CDL, but I've always wondered, they're not in a perfect situation. They might be in a field. So for them to think that they can time is questionable to me because, and it's a little crazy on set too.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that when you see something that maybe isn't quite right because of the craziness on the set? So
Absolutely.
is that a political situation?
It can be a little bit. And again, every job is different. So I think what's best is if you can have a conversation at the beginning of a project as to where those maybe roles and responsibilities are going to shake out. At best case is a DIT who's on set and they'll have calibrated monitor and hopefully a relatively sensible environment that they can look at their monitor when they're doing adjustments. But they're there on the set, and oftentimes they have the ear of the DP as well. And if it's a case of where you could be filming on location somewhere, and then shipping the dailies back to a lab in a different country. So having someone on the set that day making those adjustments as per what the DP is looking for is extremely useful, because when it comes into the suite for me, again, it gives me a really strong indication of what it is that they were trying to achieve. I think it's usually my responsibility then to take that as a strong intention. However, if you're going to notice where there's shot to shot, there's maybe some different balances that need to be made, or things, so that when the dailies are eventually created and they go to the cutting room and then they start editing with these shots, that the grade doesn't bump and everything is just homogeneous and makes sense. So I think there is a little bit of interpretation there, and then there are some scenarios where you will have shows where they will just do all of the DIT might do all of the color on set, and maybe there isn't a dailies colorist involved, and they'll just send.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's not uncommon. And again, there can be good points about that and bad points, because what worst case scenario with something like that is that people aren't keeping an eye on the dailies, and you could have a situation where somebody is in a tent, and in order to make footage match or anything, maybe they're just taking down contrast and desaturating things and sending that off so that everything will look relatively consistent and there won't be any bumps with color. And then when you get into the DI suite and you put the color back and you put the contrast back, everything is just mismatching, and then you have to do a whole lot of extra grading on top just to get it to match, because maybe the intention wasn't that you desaturate everything.
Yeah, there was a case, I won't specify what it was, but I remember there was a film that shot that were just watching their dailies on set, not actually going into a screening room and everything. And the director kept asking for it to be darker and darker. And when they eventually looked at the footage in a screening room, they found it was so underexposed. They weren't seeing all the grain or noise in the image, and the image was breaking apart. So they had to reshoot.
It's also the cases that the DIT, his only responsibility, it or hers, is not color. I mean, he also,
Oh,
there's a camera
absolutely.
problem and he's got to
Mhm.
figure out all of this. So it doesn't always make sense to me to not have someone who's dedicated to pulling the look
Yes, I
together.
mean,
Instead, you've got a guy that or a woman that has to run after a cable and has to focus on that. It's just not
yeah,
easy.
I go back to the film days where, if you were shooting in town or even if you were shooting on location, you would probably watch dailies in the morning
Mm,
before you started shooting.
Right.
And if you were in town, you'd watch dailies with a color timer at the lab,
mm,
to just be able to adjust it. So if there needed to be a reprint before the director saw it in the evening, usually that there was time to do that. How often does that happen? I know when we were shooting 1917, you were our dailies timer,
mm.
and we had a setup down in Salisbury, right
Yeah.
on Salisbury Plain, so that we could watch dailies in the morning, or at least James did always. Sometimes I couldn't before the start of the day. I mean, how common is that? How often are you relating to the cinematographer in that way, in that old-fashioned way of every morning watching dailies?
Well, which is also very difficult too, because you've been working during the night, and I
Yeah.
really
Right.
did appreciate your coming in first thing in the
Well, that's
morning.
very true. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, again, it depends on show to show. It's generally that's not the typical way. I think that a lot of shows work.
We've been told that.
So I've worked on some shows where they're shooting film, and then that'll go to the lab to get processed. Then it comes, at the time, it used to come to us here at Company 3, and we would scan it. And then there'd be dailies assists. At the time I was dailies colorist. I'd have a couple of assists working with me, and they would start preparing timelines and reels for me to look at. So marking up the scenes and takes and doing the sound syncing and getting it all ready for me then to do my color pass. Typically speaking, I tended not to start until about maybe 4 or 5 in the morning when working on shows like that, because there was obviously the turnaround time for film to go to the lab, to get processed, to come here,
Right.
to get scanned, and then, and also I used to always want to see have a couple of roles ready to look at rather than just jumping in on the first role, because that might not be very indicative of what the rest of the scene is, and it's much better to, generally speaking, I would start on a wider shot and then maybe go to a couple of closer shots and grade those, and then try and find a midpoint between the two, and then you kind of you grade the scene. So on shows where I've done it like that, I've had a DP come in every morning at about maybe 5:30, 6. So I would have had maybe an hour or two with the footage to set a look at it, and he would come in. That was Matt Jensen on both Wonder Woman films. Actually, he would come in and we would look at the film dailies, and he would give some notes, and then he'd go off to set. But at least he had confidence in, each day what he was seeing, what would be going out. He would have sat down, watched with, and we would have discussed if there was anything that maybe he needed to keep an eye on, or he was kind of wanting to get feedback on before going back to the set that later that day. And then I've had other shows like 1917, which are digital shows, and that gives you a slightly different rhythm, because what you can do is you can come in. James, you're always amazing at organizing splits for us. So
Yeah, that's my strength.
which
Split.
makes a huge difference, because it means that we get half the day's shoot in much earlier, and in the early evening we can sit down and we can start going through the process for dailies, the syncing, the tagging of scene and take, and then doing that initial color pass. So oftentimes on something like 1917, by 7 or 8 I will have done PM. I will have done most of the color work that I'm doing, and then I'll start doing another very important part of a day's time, which is QC. So watching stuff back in real time, and looking out for any technical issues or anything that I might need to be reported on for people to be aware of, either for later down the line in the DI, or even sometimes for the next day's shoot.
And I want to say that on 1917, Mr. Eagle Eyes, you did catch something that nobody else could see unless you really pointed it out. It was a camera issue, and it is really, it makes you feel so much more secure if you know that someone's actually doing that and actually checking. So if we have a problem, we can stop it. We can
Absolutely.
fix it.
Absolutely. That's a big part of the when I was working as a dailies colorist, that was a big part of my job. Possibly even the most important part, really, when you think about it, is that the footage is, there's no issues, and that what you're getting, you have full confidence in is correct, and you're going back to set the next day without any further issues. Be it something with a light maybe flickering on set, you wouldn't really see that too much with digital, but certainly on film shows there might be a flickering light somewhere, or maybe there's a I don't know, a loading issue perhaps, or there's something in it with a camera, or there's something with a sensor maybe that needs to be addressed.
And then we go from dailies into the DI, which is a whole new thing, and you're actually working with more tools in the DI. So how do you start? I mean, do you do a pre-timing before you start with either director or DP?
Typically speaking, yes. If it's a film show, I will almost always do some level of pre-timing on it. That could be using the offline as a reference and then going back and matching that, and maybe, unlike in dailies where you don't have the luxury of knowing where those edits are.
Right.
I when you're sitting down to begin a DI, you do know where they are. So I will have watched the film. I will have talked with the film makers, and I will then go about doing a pre-balance, as I say, especially if it's a film show. And what that also could entail is, because I'll get CDLs, and it depends on where those CDLs have come from, and if they're, I'll take a look at those, and if I think they're suitable. Sometimes adjustments will be made in CDLs where there'll be maybe a lot of extra saturation going in, or they'll be making adjustments that I perhaps wouldn't do it in quite that same way. So I might take that CDL, take a still reference, and then recreate it using kind of known parameters for me, so that I know I've interacted with each shot and I kind of know where everything stands. There's no surprises there for me that's hiding in a CDL on my first node somewhere in the resolve. Again, with some digital shows, if the CDLs are, solid. So, for example, sometimes we'll have a lot of shows that will do their dailies with us, will finish with us as well. So if it's a show like that, and having worked in the department for a very long time, I'm quite friendly. I'm very close with the dailies guys here. We'll have a early meeting about what the approach is for the film, and a talk about kind of how they'll approach it. They're their own colorists in their own right, so I don't want to be looking over their shoulder. They do a great job, and I need to be able to give them the freedom to do what they do. But also then they're feeding into me with CDLs in a way that I might find very useful, so that there's minimal re-going around the houses to recreate things that don't need to be redone. So again, it depends on each show, and it depends on the provenance of things like CDLs and stuff.
Presumably, if it's done in-house, that your dailies timing will be compatible with the DI timing, whatever system you're using.
Yes.
But if something's coming from another facility, is it always transferable? You're on Resolve, but there's other different systems, aren't there?
It depends on how, I guess, tight they were with their dailies in terms, like, from a technical standpoint. Were they grading with the CDL only values? Were they adding things additional to that? Sometimes I've seen things where we were getting Resolve sessions where they're grading post a LUT, which is going to be problematic for us when we come to do a DI.
That's what I was going to ask you, because sometimes the editor makes a lot of, on Avid, will make some changes.
Of course.
And how do you incorporate that? And is it coming just from the editor, or do the other filmmakers know? How does that
can
work?
be tricky, and again, I think there has to be a common sense approach with something like that. If someone has gone off piste, so to speak, where they're obviously trying to nudge things into a more, a coherent way with where they're looking to bring the film. That's always useful, incredibly useful, but it's then on me to make that technically correct and make sense within the workflow of what we're trying to achieve. And it could be that there's a few little things that'll shake out a little differently, and it's on me to be able to explain that properly and to come up with a solution that everybody's happy with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you work with someone in any category in film, you sort of have to get into their mind,
Yeah.
because if someone tells you in timing, I'd like it to be add a little bit of blue. What is a little bit to one person, to Roger, is minuscule,
Yeah.
but might be to someone else who's coming off a super saturated project, a much bigger amount of blue. So how do you have any tricks to quickly figuring this out, what their reference is?
Yeah. I don't think I have any tricks necessarily. I think before I work with any client that I haven't worked with before, whether that's a DP and or a director, I'll always watch some of their previous work. So I get a sense of what their general aesthetic is. Oftentimes, what's telling for me is things like contrast and saturation. And again, every job has its own quirks and is different. You're not trying to remake the same look, but that'll often give me a kind of a rough idea of what their eye will navigate towards. And then from there, it's relationship building, and it's listening and figuring out how people use language and what their responses is, and sometimes that could just be in that first initial maybe day that you're working together, where as you're going through scenes, you start making adjustments, and there's a very quick feedback loop there of, oh, can we bring this down a little bit, and maybe I'll bring it down a little bit, like, oh, did it move? I didn't see that move very much. So then okay, they mean bring this down quite a bit more, and then you start getting into that mindset of, oh, okay, this is the kind of the nature of what their eye is seeing and what their adjustments mean, and sometimes you might similarly approach that, and you make a big adjustment, and that's completely too much. Okay, fine, we're into far more nuanced things here. I think there's a lot of things that what a colorist does that has resonance with music. And it's almost like you're trying to find a similar type of language. If you're hearing a song or someone play an instrument, you're trying to find that same level of language to describe certain things. And everybody's ear is a little different, and it's very nuanced. So you're trying to find that kind of that line, really.
And also, I think sometimes people don't know how to get to what they want, or even sometimes how to describe it, so you must have to be a translator at times, because they say it's not right, it's just not right. And maybe they'll say to you, it needs to be brighter, but really what it is that touch of blue will make it seem that way.
Absolutely.
I learned that from Roger. But so I guess you have to patiently and unobtrusively sort of teach them in a way, adding a little bit of blue will actually do what you want, and also figure out what it is that they don't like about the shot.
Absolutely.
That's difficult.
Absolutely. I think there'll be times where if I'm in a situation like that, and if someone's asking for something, I might say, okay, maybe I show you two versions. Maybe I'll show you two versions. And we'll look at one that has a bit more, bit brighter, and this is actually kind of a bit more blue in it. And we flip between the two, and what do you think? And sometimes that can help, again, bridge that gap with descriptive differences with certain things. So that's another part of my job for sure.
Well, it's really interesting. I found in the early days of doing a DI, especially on Oh Brother, We're Out There, for instance, we would be sitting in the timing suite, for like 12 hours. and then you'd go home and you'd come back the next day, or you'd come in and Joel and Ethan would come in with us, and you'd look at it again and think, my God, what is that? Because your eye had adjusted to the image.
Yeah.
And you kept going. In that case, we'd go more and more red saturated and whatever. And when you watch it afresh, it was like, oh my God. And I was thinking back, when it was the days of film timing, you go to the lab and see an answer print, and you discuss that with a timer. You come back a few days later and watch another print and another print a few days after that. And maybe you do three prints, and you would always come to it fresh with fresh eyes, look at it anew and could judge it for that. But also you wouldn't be going through it shot by shot, because you'd be watching it real time usually. And you would be making your comments to the timer, who would be noting it or recording what you're saying as you're going through it. But now, because the whole system of the DI, whether you're shooting film or digital original, it doesn't matter. The whole system is so powerful. You can do so much that I found it, and I don't know how you work with other people. I mean, I found it, I have to be there all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't do what I used to do at the lab, which is come in and watch a new version. I mean, how do you usually work with people? We've always worked actually, together. Yeah.
You're always under the wire.
Again, it can depend, and it varies wildly from client to client. I think when you're in the part of the process of a DI, where you're, if it's a feature and it's going to be a 2-week DI, that first week where you're getting the film into shape, for me is very just kind of almost like nuts and bolts type thing. You're doing a pass where you're getting it all to be even, and you're hitting bigger, wider notes on scenes, and then where I like to get to in the first week is that's kind of done. And then the second week is just watching the film and making adjustments here and there. Maybe there's something you wanted to try with the scene where you can, I was thinking maybe we should cool this whole scene down. And then you can try, and you've time to play with that and go over and back. It's interesting talking about the difference between, a modern timing scenario and one from before, because it's a very, I think, what they probably call like a lean in experience, from a colorist's point of view. You've got the whole controls in front of you, and you can just, as you're watching things, there's temptation to adjust things and manipulate, and you can overcook things. There's no two ways about that. You absolutely can, and it's important to know when you're approaching that, to step away or go out, maybe refresh your eyes or take a break. But what I like to do at some point in the process is almost have a kind of a lean back experience with it, where I just watch it and I'll make notes. So a lot of the time for me, that could be just grade bumps and things like that, or maybe there's a face that isn't tracking quite the same way, or there's something in a scene that's maybe not kind of clicking with me, and rather than stopping and then going back and spending a lot of time to kind of working on that, I like to just watch the whole thing and then make some notes and then go back and address those and maybe go again. So I think that's kind of a valuable part of the process, certainly for me at least, is to have those moments where you kind of just let the film wash over you, and
it's also why you watch a movie through before you start timing too, to know where things fall in the story, because it does make a difference, because you realize, oh, this is really critical after this scene or whatever. You have to.
Absolutely. You're not necessarily trying to make every image pretty. There's a tone of the film that you're trying to encapsulate and enhance and help. That's a big part of it. You're trying to help what the tone of the scene is, and if you're just making everything bright and pretty and beautiful, then you're not interacting with the film, you're not serving the film, you're not serving the purpose of the story, and you're kind of kidding yourself, really.
Do you think with the prevalence of people in their hobbies using Photoshop, that a lot of people come into the timing suite thinking they could do it if you just let them be at the panel? They could do it themselves. I mean, I've seen it. There is definitely a role in the timer to be able to translate what the person wants and know how to finesse it. While if I sat at the board, I would know what I wanted, but I would probably hit the wrong buttons. But do you feel that I did sort of notice when we started getting into it that people who had been at home and played with Photoshop seemed to think that they could do it on their own and that you were really just unnecessary in the room?
Well, I guess that is a part of, when I started out, there wasn't, I'd never really heard of a colorist, even,
Right.
when I first started out, and then trying to learn more about software and the systems that people use. At the time, there wasn't a lot of stuff online about that. And now you can get your free versions of things like Resolve, and you can go on, and there's a whole load of fantastic, tutorial videos and books and articles where people show you how to use the software. So you can learn that stuff pretty good. But I also feel like in doing so, there's a real there's almost like there's almost like a want to overly manipulate things and add things in just for the sake of it, and
Because you can.
because you can. So for example, Resolve has so many amazing tools, and on each new version they add in more and more. Personally, I don't use a lot of those. I use some of the same tools that have been in it for the last 10 years, more maybe. So you can. There is a real danger with just adding things and adding things and adding things, and then you take a step back and it looks crazy. It looks wacky. It's overcooked, and you're not spending the time working in, as I say, with me having spent a lot of time in dailies, working in those kind of more simplistic and
Right.
in terms of color science, a more organic way of working, where you're not pulling and pushing the images left, right, and center, and it's softer, and you're not going to have as many kind of harsh things going all over the place. And I think that is something that you have when people come in and maybe they've been doing things on Photoshop, and maybe they I guess a classic would be where the color science is different on the clips, on the shots, that they're maybe working on a photo that was taken on set, and they're with a DSLR, and they're manipulating it, and then you come into the DI suite, and we're working with underneath a LUT that is maybe has some sort of film emulation on it, perhaps, and the colors are just not going to match. They're just not going to get there. So I think that has to be approached as a sense of, that's, again, it can be very useful, but you're never going to get exactly that. We can use it as a pin to try, or a point to try and move towards, but you have to be a little bit careful with that.
I was thinking, it's like whether you take a still photograph or you shoot a scene on set, you're doing it for a reason. You're reacting to something that's there, and you're seeing it in a certain way. And then you get into the timing, whether it's in Photoshop or in a DI suite, and you think, you change something, and because it's new and you've been looking at the original so long, you maybe think, oh, that's better, that's cool.
That's cool.
And you kind of, there's a danger that you forget exactly what you liked about the shot and why it works so well for the story, or why the frame works so well as an image, as a still photograph, instead of being something manipulated. You certainly see it in still photography.
Yeah.
You see the softness and the AI put on, and suddenly the photograph that may be kind of pure and simple and raw becomes something really over manipulated and rather uninteresting.
And sometimes it's hard to figure out where the problem is. We've been in situations where the timer adds a window and then adds a window on top of that window to do something different, and then adds another window on top of that that's actually contradicting the first window, and then doing another one. And then when we look at it and say, wait, have you added windows? No, there's no windows, but you can see that there are windows. And then you realize that it's all working against each other. So you have to take everything off
Take
Yeah.
it all up
and
and
just start
look at
again.
what you really liked in the first place.
Yeah,
You
right.
go, oh,
Why were
that's
we
kind of
here?
good.
Absolutely. And again, a big part of that
Yeah.
is then comes back to the idea of discipline in what you're doing in those scenarios, where it's
Mhm.
very easy to just keep adding, in Resolve, adding nodes, adding windows, and
Mhm.
adding things, and then it just starts to look kind of crazy. And
Mhm.
oftentimes the best thing to do in those situations is to just start from scratch again and go far more simple with what you're doing.
Mm,
That
mm.
works in lighting too. If you're really
No,
tired
yeah, it's
and
the
you
same
throw
thing.
everything in, you
Yeah.
go, wait, let's
And
start all
also
over.
it's something new. Oh, that looks different. That's
Yeah,
new.
right.
And you've been looking at something so long, you got bored with it, maybe,
Yeah.
or you think you have. But we also must say that you're looking at a big screen. Somebody looking at a small monitor at home, timing in Photoshop,
Oh, that's a good
it's a
point.
very different sensation.
Yeah.
I mean, you're always timing in a DI suite with a very big image, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great point. That's the way, even sometimes, whether it's you're keying something and you're pushing it too far, and then you start to see that breakup, when you're looking at it on a
Mhm.
bigger screen that you might not have seen before.
Right.
Or even just the way that the images and the imagery washes over you when you're watching a
Yeah.
film like that. It can be quite different. It
Right.
can be a very different experience when you're watching it.
I found this, Have you found this sort of timing something for a theatrical presentation and for a TV version? It can be different, the way the color affects you, the balances of color in the frame and the contrast affects you differently on a big screen as on a monitor.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the size and the scale of it, your eyes are just reading it in a slightly different, way in terms of scale. You're taking it in slightly differently, and on certain aspects of that, when you're doing a home version, you might want to enhance or reduce or adjust that a little bit. I think that's completely.
And let's talk a little bit about visual effects because they've become more and more part of the process. And what that's doing oftentimes, because oftentimes they come at the end of the job. And so you've got to start timing, otherwise, you're never going to get it done. And then they start adding in. So you've got to go back. And what do you look at when you're looking at a visual effects shot? Because it's really important to have someone else's eyes on them too, because of matte lines and things like that.
So I think you're looking at, first of all, what the intention of the VFX is and whether that's reading correctly and is appropriate. And then you're looking for technical issues as well. So, and a big part of that, again, I have the luxury of sitting in a large theater here with a big screen, and I can look at those things and QC them quite substantially. And then as you're versioning up through things, I think a lot of the time you also don't want to be too heavy-handed in the grade. So that film, The Lost Bus, has a lot of VFX, a lot of fire VFX stuff in it, and in terms of what I'm doing in the grade with a lot of specifically those VFX, which are incredibly successful VFX, I'm not really doing a lot with that at all. That is the VFX coming in, and it's sitting underneath the lookup table. It has my same color adjustments on it that it would have had on the base plate. Maybe I'm having to warm it up ever so slightly, but I don't want to manipulate it in too much a way as we're going through that VFX process, where it's going to, when the VFX artists are looking at it or the post super is looking at it in reviews, it's going to confuse matters, and they start thinking something is off or something is not reading in the same way that they want it to. It makes a lot more sense for them to go back and to maybe make some adjustments in the VFX that then come back in. And if I'm getting things like mattes, that I'm only making maybe small adjustments within those for the most part. Sometimes there's some shots and maybe it's just a budgetary thing or a schedule thing where you will pull things out a little more, or even in the grade there's times where there's just something in a VFX shot that maybe you just want to enhance in the grade, and that way then you'll start going in and manipulating a little bit more. But you don't want to get into, as you were saying, that cycle of putting windows and things and confusing people. It needs to be a fairly considered and sensible approach through the process.
And when you're looking at visual effects, though, you're also, since oftentimes you know the scene already, sometimes the light direction can be wrong in a visual effects, right? So you're looking with your eyes because maybe they're looking to see whether the magic apple on the tree looks right or whatever. But with your eyes, since you're also seeing how it fits in with the whole thing, you might catch the fact that it looks like it's lit from the left when the rest
completely.
of the scene's lit from the
and
right.
that could be then something that I'll advise on whether it's something we can fix in the grade, or if it's something that is best served to go back to VFX to be adjusted there. I mean, everybody's looking for the same endpoint, and with the path of least resistance. So I guess it's walking that line a little bit and getting it there.
And also at the end of the project, always the phrase that you're going to hear over and over again is, can we fix it in the DI?
Yeah.
Or worse yet, we can fix it in the DI when it's something they can't.
Yeah, and that's you want to avoid that as much as possible. That's for sure.
Do you sometimes, I mean, you give it a try, but are there some things where you think I better not try this because I know I can't do it in the end? So,
Yeah.
it'll just be a lot of discussion.
Yeah. So sometimes you need to, I think, be clear about what you're looking at and let people see the faults that are, or the problems that are there without masking them. So if it is something later down the line that you do just need to figure it and sort it out, that those conversations have been had early on and everybody knows the state of play and where you're going to get with there and what the limitations of what you can maybe do will be with that. But
it's tricky though, isn't it? Because there's also the standard issue. I mean, you have incredibly high standards.
Yeah.
I mean,
which is good.
The camera fault that you picked out on 1917, when James talked to production about it, they went, "Oh yeah," as though it didn't matter because it was so background and so in their view insignificant, but not in our view. So I mean, it's a difficult balance sometimes, isn't it? It's like, I know on set, it's when you're lighting, they say, "Well, it looks all right to me. Well, let's just shoot."
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like.
Yeah, I always think it's best to point those things out and have those conversations, and then at least everybody's able to make a shared agreed way of moving forward with that, whatever the decision may be. You don't want surprises. That's the last thing you want.
Do you think that there are certain skills a person should have if they're thinking about becoming a timer?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, to be honest, is being good with people and being able to read people.
That's very true.
Yeah, I really do. There's a certain amount of training your eye, and there's a certain amount of learning the craft and all of that type of thing. But if you're not able to engage with people properly, then you're going to come up with problems pretty quickly, because a lot of the time you're it's my job to fulfill the vision that the filmmakers have for their film. Even though I'm involved at various different parts, maybe through the process. This is a show or a project that people have been involved in for many years in some cases, and it's my responsibility to get it to where they want it to be, and sometimes you can have conflicting voices as to where that end goal may be, and it's part of my job to be able to, I guess, keep everybody happy and keep things moving in a direction that everybody agrees with. So I think people skills is a big part of it, and a passion as well. I mean, the hours can be quite long, and certainly when I was doing dailies work, a lot of night shifts and things. So I think you have to certainly be passionate about it. Maybe have a bit of a mind for creative mind and a technical mind. I think that's one of the things that I really like about being a colorist as well, is that there's a nice overlap between technical and creative. But those are maybe some of the things I think you would really need.
Oh, are the most challenging situations you can find yourself in from a technical point of view? We know the challenges of having two people in a room that hate each other, but not those challenges. I mean, the technical challenges.
I suppose technical challenges would include things like, well, first of all, again, from the shoot, if the dailies have been masking certain issues, or the footage comes in and it's completely at odds with what they are looking for in the final grade, that's a problem, because oftentimes there could be a limit where you can push things
Right.
without it starting to look odd or pushed. So, and that's not even just from an exposure point of view. That could be the type of lighting that's there, or even some of the production design. If it's just not there, if it's not in the footage, and it's not, it wasn't captured at the time, and you're really they're trying to push it completely in a different direction, then that's a problem. So that's something that you need to address.
I mean, I know that sometimes it's when second unit is exposing completely differently than main unit.
Yeah.
Well, I think the problem we've come across too is that in effects houses now, there's so many effects houses doing different shots. Those shots can come back and they're meant to fit into the same sequence, but actually from different effects houses, one looks very different from another.
Absolutely.
And if you don't get them early enough, you haven't got a chance to tell whether you can actually time it in, or whether it has to go back and, as you said before, be fixed in visual effects rather than in the DI timing.
Yeah, and explain to them what the difference
what the problem is. Yeah.
And it's far better that it come from you than from someone else sort of vaguely explaining it. You can explain it to them in terms of exposure and color.
The Lost Bus must have been tricky in that there's a lot of effects, and I presume that you're matching in shots that are made without real firelight into scenes that are lit by firelight. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine the way of shooting, there must have been quite a lot of variation in what was shot that you had to match in.
I guess not terribly so much on that show, because I suppose that would be more of something for the DP Paul and the visual effects team to maybe comment on, because by the time it came into me, they'd done such a good job that the massaging of all of those elements wasn't a particularly challenging, like no more so than any other show where you've got an idea of what the look is and what the warmth is that you're looking for, and a general kind of filmic contrasty vibe, and you go with that. So the Lost Bus was pretty straightforward. I'm trying to think, but we did have a show a couple of years ago where the dailies were done by a different company, and I don't think the DP had been keeping maybe as close an eye on the dailies as he maybe should have been doing. And there was a lot of atmosphere being used on various scenes. And on some takes there was atmosphere, and on some takes there was no atmosphere. And in the dailies, what they were doing was just because of that, in order to make things kind of match a little bit better, they were just taking all the contrast out of the shots that didn't have smoke in it. So when we came to do the finishing and they wanted that contrast put back in, there were a lot of VFX on this show. That took a long time to get into a sensible place, because what they had been looking at was not a representation of what was in the photography. And yeah, that was a tricky one. That was a tricky one for sure.
We also wanted to talk about the different deliverables, because, for instance, you timed the feature, but then we've got to do an HDR, we got to do a Rec 709, we got to do a this, we got to do a that. And I know that what people want to hear is there's an easy algorithm that you can switch from one format to another, but we've
never found one.
We've never found it to be true. We've ended up with some wonderful HDR versions, but that was by maybe putting a basic algorithm on it, but then going scene by scene. because different scenes react differently.
Yeah.
So what's your experience with deliverables?
So, and again, you bring up a kind of an interesting, a hot topic, which is HDR and how people approach that, and I think it's very much still in a state of flux as to where people land on it, and it can be very dependent show to show as to how maybe heavy you lean into HDR, and of course what the sensibilities are of the creative team, as well as to how far you go with something like that. So deliverables wise, standard for us would be that we would do a theatrical deliverable. So we would do a P3 D65 grade, and then from there you might do things like a standard home delivery, which would be Rec 709. And then from there, maybe you're going up to do HDR, Dolby Vision deliverables as well. Even some shows, even at the moment, are doing film outs and things. So there's all sorts of different ways to shake that out.
Yeah.
So that's something that you have to certainly consider from the very beginning as to what the deliverables are and how you approach those. A lot of the time, from my side of things, I will tend to approach, if it's a theatrical release, if it's going to be a feature, we will start in P3 D65, and we will start in the theater, and we will grade the film, and that's the master.
Right.
That's the master look of the film. And moving from P3 to Rec 709 is not a huge leap in terms of the color science. So if you're just doing a discrete 709 deliverable, that can often be achieved by changing to a different output LUT, and then watching the film through and maybe making a few minor, usually fairly minor tweaks to the deliverable. And that's how those two deliverables tend to be achieved. Going to HDR is a little different. From there, having started in the theatrical P3 D65, we will go to a PQ P3 D65 PQ curve, and we'll go to a monitor. So we'll leave the DI suite, and we'll go to a Bay, perhaps here Company 3, and we'll look at it on a Sony X300 perhaps, and we'll start dialing in the HDR there. So you're swapping, usually, again, this is all color managed workflows. We're swapping to a PQ LUT, show LUT, and from there then setting in an overall trim of where the highlights may be, spectral highlights will maybe ping to, and then kind of from there down, making overall adjustments to try and get to where is a sensible place for the film, and then going through the film and making scene by scene or shot by shot adjustments as and when required.
But there's also theatrical HDR.
There is. So following then from maybe something like that, you would have DV108. So I guess if a standard theatrical version is at 48 nits, this DV108 is going to be 108. So it's quite a big step up. And I think that we had a bit of fun on that with Empire of Light, where, if I remember correctly, at the very opening of the film, there's a fade to, like, it goes to white. And when we swap to the DV108 version, and that very first, I think it's on a logo or something, it almost blinds you just before the film even begins. So there's things like that where you're like, okay, we'll need to reduce that down quite a bit, because that can get, blindingly bright. And then from there, kind of going through and seeing where again, doing a pass and seeing where all that sits. What was also interesting about maybe that film and other similar films when you go to HDR, I think, is a lot of the times people will monitor on set still in SDR. And then you go and you start doing your different deliverables, and you go to HDR, and suddenly you're looking outside windows and there's detail that wasn't there, that you weren't seeing before, that you're now seeing. And in the case of something like Empire of Light, that was amazing, because as they were looking out from the cinema out to that seafront, you're seeing a lot more detail in the sea and the sky, and that's stunning. That's amazing. But then you're also occasionally seeing maybe some rigging at a light that wasn't there
Exactly. There was
before.
a lighting rig outside of a bleached out window. Yeah. You go,
So then that becomes either, is it a VFX, or generally speaking, if depending what is you'll just try and do something in the grade where maybe you'll soften that off and pop it a little differently so that it masks it a little bit better. But so you're in completely right, James. There's a Dolby Vision one away. We don't do a lot of those, I suppose, or those tend to be few and far between. We do have a laser projector here at Company 3, so we are able to do DIs with that, but they tend to be maybe they're becoming more common as we progress. But they're only for
it's a question.
Yeah, it's a question
of theatrical.
Yeah.
Of
really
how many theatricals? Yeah. What do you think is some common mistakes people might make when they start out as a timer? Maybe overcorrecting, but
yeah, I think that is a big part of it. I think, again, if you're working on something, maybe not talking enough with the DP or the director as to what they're looking for reference wise, getting all your ducks in a row in terms of the technical aspects of things, spending time to go through the film, maybe make some notes about what you think in terms of the tone, what you could maybe add to it or not. I feel if you're inexperienced, you're going to probably want to do more than is sometimes necessary. Sometimes the job is very simple and straightforward, and you listen to what's needed, and you can work with that, and it's just about getting it into a good shape and tweaking it from there. But and other times, then people will ask you to go wild and present me with something, a new look or something like that, and that's great, and there's a lot of fun in that. But I think inexperience is when you don't know which one of those it is. And you have a tendency just to go head straight forward and run into just lots of different adjustments and corrections with things that are completely unnecessary, and not taking the time to just spend time with the footage and go a bit softly with it and see what's there.
I would also think too that not knowing when to say, okay, in order to achieve this, like if you have to roto a window or something, why don't I do it tonight after you're gone? Because making them sit through some of these tedious things will wear them out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And not help them view what they need to view. But
yeah, so sometimes you do need to be able to say, this is boring. This is a boring part of the job.
Yeah.
You're going to be much happier if you take an early afternoon or go out for lunch. I'll have it done, by the time we come back. And I have that myself sometimes. If there's a specific shot maybe we hit, and there's a scene and it's just lacking something, I might say, okay, maybe we break for lunch and you head off for an hour. I'll have lunch in the suite here, and I'll keep noodling at it, and something will hit me. I'll have something for you in about an hour, and I think that's useful because it gives me a bit of space to play around with some things and get it in a good place. And it's also useful because the client gets to refresh their eyes, come back and see it freshly presented, rather than kind of all of the different noodlings to get to that point. And it gives them a clearer way of either saying, thumbs up, this looks like a good direction, or I don't think so. Maybe we need to go somewhere else with this.
So here's a question.
Oh no!
We can't stop.
The other day, I was getting one of my still photographs printed in a large format, right? Yeah. And the lab timer there said he did some strips of the large image, and they look kind of nice. He said, "I didn't use AI on this at all. I didn't feel it needed any AI."
That's good.
And as well as I do, in Photoshop now, there's an AI. You can get AI enhancement. It's quite good.
Yeah.
I used it on a newspaper photograph
for the book.
Yeah, for the book. But how is that being introduced into the DI suite? I mean, you talk about doing windows, but you can actually do kind of a rotoscoping in the DI suite now. And how does AI help you do that to make 3D sort of separations?
Yeah. So again, it's an evolving technology, and there's a lot of different things that are starting to shake out with how people may use it in our industry. And in Resolve, there are starting to come online more and more AI tools that have a variety of different uses. I haven't spent a lot of time interacting with a lot of those, but one of the ones in which I quite enjoy is the AI depth map, which again, it's a way of selecting things, and then there's an AI algorithm in the Resolve box, and that'll allow you can finesse it, but it's kind of using an algorithm to detect the depth of certain things with an image, where maybe I can't pull a very successful key, but I can use this AI plugin, to spatially say in the image, this is kind of where I want to make my selection, and the algorithm does its thing, and it's able to create a map for me where I'm then able to adjust that, and that's invaluable. I've used that on a number of things recently, and it's been great.
So can you use that? You were talking earlier about this difficult sequence you had that was varying levels of smoke, of atmosphere in the shot. Could you use that to do separation and add atmosphere or add less contrast in the background to give the effect of atmosphere in depth?
You can. I think what I've seen of that so far, it can be very shot dependent, and it can take some shots, it'll be a lot more successful than others, and some shots it'll be a lot quicker to get that selection finessed in and working than others. So it really does depend on how maybe static a shot is, or where things are in relation to the frame and the amount of smoke or that you're trying to bring in or reduce or what have you. So it can really depend. It really depends. But it is something that is no question is making an impact, and is very good. Yeah.
But for now, you would recommend shooting it as best you can in
get
camera.
it in camera if you can is always the safe bet. It's always a safe bet. But no, I mean, there's all sorts of different applications for AI in grading software. Same with, we Resolve has this system called Magic Masks, where it can detect a face, which can be useful if people are wanting to tweak, bring a face up, or maybe soften out some skin tones and things like that. That can be super useful as well. And it's amazing. You can tell it if it's it recognizes a face, or you can tell it if it's an object, and it'll recognize it if it's an object. So it's a whole new world.
Whole new world, yeah.
One last question. Colorist, timer, grader. Is part of that country-wise that England will say grader, America will say timer, or is it timers because of the lab days? What's the proper term?
I've been called worse. No, I think just go what makes you happy, I suppose. There's no real delineation on that. A lot of people say colorist. I mean, even the way people spell colorist differs. Sometimes people drop the U or keep it in there. Yeah, I mean, I've had scenarios where I remember years ago, I used to dread being asked when I was at like a party, or if I was meeting someone for the first time, what do you do? Because I'm a colorist, and they think, what is that? They think I dyed people's hair or something, and I have to explain what is a colorist.
I don't think timer is much better either, because people, when I say something about a timer, they think, well, what are they doing to the film?
Boiling an egg.
Making sure it's in the right time, or that it's at least 3 hours long. But
no, I think I guess colorist and grading is fairly common these days. Timer is probably a little bit on the way out, but I like that. I kind of like that.
I think isn't timer from when they used to actually develop strips to tell about the timing of the print, and they would develop a little strip, so it's how long you develop the strip. I don't know.
I thought the timer was the timing of when the red, green, and blue lights were all up. It's up for this length, and then blues.
I think even that goes back to actually the time of a development. I don't know. Somebody will write.
Someone will
Yeah,
make a
right.
comment about
Someone
it.
will know, and we'll try and post it.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for doing this. We
Thank
have
you, James.
obviously we
my
could
pleasure.
go on for hours on this, but
Yeah.
we really appreciate it because a lot of people
Yeah.
want to know more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's
Very
been
informative.
my
Yeah.
pleasure. It's been lovely to
Yeah.
chat. Thank you, guys.
We appreciate all you've done for us too.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I just very quickly, I was wondering if it'd be any use when we were talking about deliverables. There was something that I glossed over that I actually didn't get to, because obviously we're talking about the home video versions, and sometimes you might have a discrete 709 version, and then if you're doing HDR and a Dolby Vision, you do what are called Dolby Vision analysis and trims from that. So oftentimes that will be where you're creating a separate version in HDR, and then within that running an analysis and then using dynamic metadata to move all the way down from your HDR timing to the SDR version. So usually what we will tend to do is maybe set our HDR at maybe 600 nits, sometimes 1,000,
Yeah.
and then work down to 100 and do 100 nit trim from there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously another thing to consider when you're doing home deliverables, how that translates and how you do that pass. So that'll be another watch through of the film and making adjustments and making sure that where those highlights, because obviously as you're moving to HDR and expanding those highlights and seeing all that extra detail, when you move back to SDR, you're going to have to sacrifice some of that detail. And it's a case of when you're establishing what the film is and how that should feel, version to version, to my mind, generally speaking, you want each version to be fairly consistent. It doesn't have to be
Right.
it doesn't have to be the same. Each a format is its own thing, but at the same time, at the end of the day, each deliverable should feel like it's the same film. So
Yeah.
that's to speak to that point. If you're moving back from HDR back down to SDR, you might need to be mindful of where you're rolling off those highlights, and that detail again is where you're losing it, and keeping that as something to track.
Well, thank
That's
you.
it. I hope I didn't waffle
Gosh.
too much.
No, not at all.
No. It's really
Very interesting.
informative. Yeah.
It's
Perfect.
really important job too.
Oh,
So
thank you. Thank
for
you.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.